Hi, friend, and welcome to this episode of Radiant Resilience. We are always looking for new guests on the podcast. I want to highlight you if you have a story of resilience that inspires others. Everyone has a story, and I believe that sharing yours can help others feel less alone. Are you ready to share your journey and inspire others? I want to hear from you. Every story has the power to impact lives and foster a supportive community. If you have a tale of overcoming adversity, personal growth, or a unique perspective on life's challenges, I would love to have you as a guest on the podcast. To become a guest, please email us directly at radiantresiliencepodcast@gmail.com or click the link in the show notes to become a guest. Join us in spreading hope, strength, and inspiration one story at a time. Be brave and share your story so others feel less alone. I hope to see you soon. Before we begin, we want to acknowledge that some stories and discussions in this episode of Radiant Resilience may touch on sensitive and potentially triggering topics. These may include themes of suicidal ideation and threats, alcohol abuse, verbal and emotional abuse, financial control and secret debt, marital difficulties and divorce, religious control and manipulation, trauma and anxiety, physical and sexual control within marriage, past marriage. Our goal is to share real-life experiences in a respectful and empathetic manner, offering insights into the complexities of the human spirit and the journey towards resilience. However, we understand that some content might be difficult for listeners. We encourage you to prioritize your well-being and discretion when deciding to listen. Please remember this podcast is not a substitute for professional advice or support. If you find yourself needing assistance, we urge you to seek help from qualified professionals or trusted support systems. Your mental and emotional health is important to us. Thank you for your courage and for joining us in a space of understanding and compassion. Welcome back, everybody, to Radiant Resilience. I am here with a very special guest, one of my dear clients, Cynda. She is truly an inspiration, a self-proclaimed goddess, mother, daughter, friend, and a tenacious entrepreneur. She is the heart and soul behind Champions Equestrian, where she has dedicated the past 23 years to coaching and developing both horses and riders to reach their fullest potential. Growing up on a horse ranch, she has lived a life deeply entwined with the equestrian world, nurturing a profound connection with these majestic animals. As a single mother, she has faced and overcome numerous challenges, including some serious injuries, financial burdens from a previous marriage, and the complexities of running a successful business while raising two amazing teenagers, Cooper and Taylor. Her journey has also seen significant personal transformations, from being a pastor's wife to embracing life after divorce and navigating the transition away from her husband and church community. Her resilience and relentless spirit continue to inspire those around her as she balances life's trials with grace and fortitude. Join us today as we talk with my dear Cynda, a true champion in every aspect of life. How are you?
I hear you say those words, it brings joy and tears at the same time. Like I'm going, somebody's reading back to me my life and what I've done. And I'm like, I can feel the tears, like almost there, in a good way, though, in a way that you're like, oh yeah, I did go through a lot of this stuff and I'm still here and I'm still going. So thank you for reading that back. People should have that read back to them, their story read back to them.
You're so welcome.
Yeah, good tears and good joy though out of it both.
Yeah. Yeah, you're a wonderful human being, and I have really enjoyed getting to know you. And I know a little bit of this story that we're going to go into just from previous conversations that we've had, but I'm sure there's still a lot that I don't even know about it. And why don't you start at the beginning of when you met your first husband?
So even if I go just a little bit slightly back from that, it will explain why I met and how we got together. I was raised in the Baptist Bible Belt. So we're talking Oklahoma, Arkansas. They call that the Baptist Bible Belt as a Catholic family. And then I ended up marrying a Lutheran pastor. So if you think about the immersion I had for 40 years of my life, from the time that I was baptized in the Catholic Church, raised in the community I was raised in, and then go to college. Actually, Oklahoma State is where I attended school, and that's where I met my first husband. And I look at the immersion of the religion, culture, and all of those things, and how that influenced my decisions, and who I then picked as a person to marry.
Oh, sure.
We met, he was older, so he's about 5 years older, and he was in his master's degree at Oklahoma State. And then I was there in my undergrad, and we were a big part of Fellowship of Christian Athletes. That's another thing. When you're in that community, it's just something that's expected and something that you belong to, especially as an athlete. I played college basketball at Oklahoma State. It was an amazing couple of years, right? Being able to
Fun.
experience. I did not date a lot of people in high school or college.
Okay. They say, did you play sports in high school too?
I did.
Yeah, especially in college. I know that the college sports, even the smaller schools, like those sports take up so much of your time. You barely have time for school at that point.
You are spot on. And through high school, it was every sport in horses. And so I was traveling nationally and competing nationally. So I'd get out of school on Friday and I would get into the horse show with my mom and the truck and trailer, and we'd drive somewhere for a competition for Saturday, Sunday, come back, I'd go to school. So it was there was not time for probably dating or boys. And I loved sports and horses. And so I was like, I wouldn't do anything to jeopardize that. So I remember that. And it's not that I didn't want a relationship. I think back and I was very much a romantic. I had this big idea of being married and having a family and staying together forever, because that's what I had my parents do. They're 55 years, I think, of marriage.
Oh,
And
that's
so
amazing.
from grandparents to parents, my witness in a marriage was that it's like for life. It's until one passes. And so I already knew that dream board, but I didn't have any experience in that field of dating. So when I went to college, it wasn't any different. And you're right, sports were full time. I probably was in my sport more than I was in the classroom. And this was before anything was online. This was before email. Right. This is before cell phones. So so in the 90s, when I was in college, it was still textbooks, and it was still, I don't know how I made it through some of my classes because we were gone so much for sports.
Oh, wow.
That I don't regret that at all, though. I loved that experience. And yet when I met my ex-husband, I had very little experience in this field of dating and understanding relationships. I knew as a Christian background what it should look like. And he had been married actually before me.
See, I don't think that's a little tidbit I knew.
That's something you probably didn't know that I even forget. He was married, being a couple of years older, he married actually his high school sweetheart. And they were together for a couple of years. And that marriage ended by her making the choice to go be with another woman, actually. She left him and they didn't have children. They were married for a few years and they were at college together. And then I met him coming out of that divorce, and then being a friend first, and then being involved in FCA. That's what we were involved in together. And then slowly starting that dating process in college.
Okay. And how long did you guys date then before you got married?
It was, about a year and a half. And when I met
quick.
It was fairly quick. By the time we were engaged, it was about a year and a half. And then by the time we were married, we were together about 2.5 years. The interesting part is he was an outdoorsman. He was rock climbing, backpacking. He was getting a master's degree in a completely different field. I didn't even know what a minister's wife was necessarily, because he'd not ever brought up, I'm going to go to seminary. You're going to be a pastor's wife. I was from the Catholic Church and the priests weren't married. So I didn't really know. I was like, I don't know what a pastor's wife is and what they do and what part of a marriage is. And so I learned that. He decided to go to seminary. We actually were apart for about a year because he went to seminary before I finished my undergrad. And so we dated together at school, then we dated long distance, and then he wanted to get married. And so I think we got married, 1999 that summer. So
how old were you?
oh gosh, I was 22, barely.
Okay.
23. Now look
Youngin,
at
but
that.
that's common in the religious world, I feel. In a lot of different religions, a lot of people just get married really young, and because that's what you're told to do is get married and have babies.
And have babies. That and the experience was so different because there's a book in the Bible called Song of Solomon, and I know a lot of people will know it. And it's this couple's relationship and how they get together and how they treat each other, and they abstain from physical contact and sex and that kind of stuff. And we did that. It was wild for our dating. If I look at our dating life and what we did, we abstained, I think, even from kissing for a while. And I
Oh,
look
wow.
back at that and I'm going, that was completely religious driven
Mm,
because human nature, and I know for both of us, we wanted that physical connection,
mm,
but we were following that of scripture that I think that we'd read forever, even the Catholic Church much against having a relationship or having sex before you got married. The Lutheran Church was the same way. And even the growing up Baptist Bible, it was that same thing. You
yeah,
get
sure.
married. And so I felt like going into the relationship, I was like, okay, I don't even know anything physically with this person. There wasn't a development. It was all based on a foundation of just us believing in God.
Mm,
So when I look back at it, especially that I've got kids and now I'm teaching them this progression of dating and how to do it, I'm very different now than I was the way I grew up.
mm,
So I regret not having more experience in relationships or understanding what that physical connection was. It was a fairy tale. Like you build it up in your mind as this kind of movie fairy tale, what it's going to be. And it definitely was not. Right?
yeah. So he went to seminary school then before you got married.
He did. So he did his first year. He had already done undergrad, a master's degree, home state, went to seminary in St. Louis, and I put the map together on what this looks like because you've got me, this ranch girl, sports girl, love life, outgoing, hadn't had a lot of experience relationships, dates. He was really the first real guy that I think I really was serious about and dated. And I look at that and I go, man, so much of that was that influence of the religion and the way I was raised. That expectation
Mm.
was to get married. And I look back now and I'm like, I don't think I would have made that choice to
Oh,
jump into
yeah.
something like that.
Well, hindsight's
I
always 2020.
always, isn't it? When you look back, you're like, how did I get here? He went to seminary for a year. I ended up joining him. We got married 99 that summer. And then I joined him in seminary, and man, my world changed.
Okay.
Taking this independent woman from what I had in my life and put me in this big city. I had never been to a big city, St. Louis. I had no idea what I was getting into in ministry. And I had to take classes to understand minister's wife. What was the
Mm.
expectation of what my behavior was?
Oh, wow.
Yes, they had women wives taking classes to understand what their was in the church and how to operate as a mother, all of those things. So they were trying to train the women to help them understand. And I think I look at that and I had no problem with that sense where I'm glad I just didn't walk into it and not know.
Sure.
But I look at it now and I'm going, wow, what a different life to what then I had married into. And
So,
what I noticed about him was he was different when he dated. And then as soon as he got almost title of I'm going to be a minister and a pastor, it separated us in our relationship in a way where he was one person and one leader and people looked at him a certain way. And then my role was this quiet, supportive, submissive role.
mm,
And it was not like that when we were dating, right?
interesting.
Yeah.
So you said you grew up Catholic. So were you as a family when you were younger? I'm going to backtrack a little bit. Did you go to church regularly and stuff like that? Or were you just, we were Catholic, but we just go to church on Easter and
Easter
Christmas?
and Christmas. No, my parents, they were in church every week, and my dad worked at a Catholic hospital. And so we were in church
Oh,
more
wow.
often, meaning
Okay.
they were in church on Fridays, they were in church on Sundays, and it was the expectation of all of the children, all of us to be in church, even when we were able alone and be there by ourselves. So yes, the expectation was definitely you're in church every single Sunday. Even when I went to college, you're in church every single Sunday.
So
So,
you
so
weren't
that,
a stranger to that world
nope,
necessarily. Yeah. So you
nope.
knew the religious world, you grew up in it, but then of course, being a pastor's wife is a whole different side of things.
That's a whole look behind the curtain that is like another country. And
Okay,
it's like,
so moving forward again, I'm going to come back to where we were. So you're taking classes. Is he
yeah.
out of seminary at this point
No,
then?
he's
He's
in
still in it.
seminary. We're living there together as a young married couple. He's going through his classes to become ordained as a minister. He still had an internship that's brought me to Colorado, and we'll get to that part. But he was taking and working, supporting us while he was trying to finish up his, which was, I think it was 4 or 5 years. I'm trying to remember how many years he ended up in seminary, but it's quite an extensive process to become a minister. And understanding that my world shifted from being this free spirit, almost being raised on the ranch, it's so different, that life. I was connected to the earth and the animals and people in different ways. And then you put me in a building. I always felt like God was much bigger than that building. God
Yeah.
was much bigger than, for me, I was like, this is being able to be out every day of the week and being able to see it. I was like, that's who God is to me. And so they really put God in this very small container when I went to seminary of, this is who he is, and this is how you believe, and this is how you're supposed to operate. And I'm just like, man, I knew it went against my intuition of what I thought God was then. And yet I thought, okay, I love this man, and I dedicated my life to serving God with him in this position that he was in. And so I was in it. And it was some dark years at seminary for me. I could not find my way. I
How
could not,
so?
oh, I lost that freedom in the sports and in the horses and the connection and family to immerse myself in this church culture and it was like leadership church culture, which is different from just being in a church. So I started to feel the deterioration of my own belief, independence, and soul, if that's what I would say. It started then that it started to deteriorate. I felt like in seminary, like I started to lose who I had built myself up to be and knew when I made that choice to marry him. And I didn't know it was going to be like that. I didn't know that it would change like that, especially
Yeah.
in the church like that. That's not the man that I dated. It's a different man now. So that was the other
Wow.
piece. Yeah.
I suppose going from being, I guess he was probably normal religious and then becoming a
Right.
pastor, that is a huge change.
That is a big jump. And how he got there was, he used to tell people he had this dream as a kid that he dreamed walking through the halls of the seminary where he went to seminary, and he dreamed his parents were very dedicated Lutherans. My parents were dedicated Catholics, and so they were in church Sunday. He did summer camps. We were both in that culture. I just thought he was going to go down the direction of being in like outdoors ministry or being in leadership in that way. And that's the kind of man I knew when we dated. So that year apart was tough because he was going in a different direction with his personality and his career. And I was still finishing up college the way I was. And then coming together, it would just, we were a match, I would call it, when we got married, because our lives had changed in the direction that they were going already prior to even getting married, right? Oh my
Oh,
God.
wow. And that's a lot of the times I feel like a lot of people don't realize that stuff until you're just in it too
Yeah.
deep. And all right, so you're doing classes, he's finishing seminary, and then you guys at some point get married in that time frame.
We did. And he got to Colorado. So we were both raised in Arkansas and Oklahoma. And he had his internship. He had to do an internship with a church out here in Denver, in Lakewood, actually. And so we moved out here for a year. I ended up this period of time where he wasn't finished with school. And so I originally, if I back up a little bit, I was headed into medical school. So I
Oh,
had gotten
wow.
everything in my degree, all but MCAT. And when he asked me to marry him, he said, "No, you're going to have to forgo medical school for a while until I get through school."
I had no idea you were trying to go to medical. See, these are
Right.
the new things I'm learning too about you. So I'm so glad
My
we're having this
family, as
conversation.
much as I was raised on a ranch, we were a big medical family. We were in pharmacy and anesthesia and physical therapy. And I wanted to be a surgeon. And and I loved it. I had done everything I'd prepared myself to be able to do. And for whatever reason, again, that's that sacrifice. You think the way I was raised in understanding marriage is there are times like now in hindsight, it was me that sacrificed all of it to be able to be with him.
Mm.
I didn't ever feel like, okay, we got married, that changed. goals and ambitions and things I wanted to do just got put by the wayside as you got married and as a minister in the church. Can you imagine? I don't imagine the church, let alone my husband, sure, go to medical school while we're trying to raise a family and trying to be in a church. It
So
just
was that
wasn't
why he asked you to quit? Was because you were supposed to, yeah, why did he ask you to quit pursuing medical school and all that?
he wanted me to be married and be in the church and be more present as that position as a minister's wife. And we hadn't talked about children. We actually didn't have children until we were about 7 years into the marriage. And so that wasn't a piece of it that was in consideration. It was just working, supporting, paying our bills and paying for school for him, doing that, supporting us just with a job instead of then us both being in school at the same time. But I think in his mind initially, he was like, oh yeah, you'll get back to it eventually. And then as we got further into seminary and got into his internship here, I just knew that wasn't going to be a choice anymore to go back into the medical field. And so how I ended up in horses, my aunt actually, who was a nun for 25 years in the Catholic Church, love her. She goes, why don't you go teach lessons and ride horses? She goes, I was like, good idea. Why wouldn't I do that?
Yeah.
2001. This is 2001 until what are we at? 2024. So 23 years.
Wow.
I went and started passing out resumes at different horse facilities to be able to become a coach and a trainer and a rider and a teacher. You actually don't have to have a degree to have that, which you don't go to college. I'm like, how do people become horse trainers? They just ride and get some experience. But my experience had been on the national level. I had performed at a level of the world championship level. So I had about 10 world titles and 10. So I had competed in all these events and gone further in horses than I did in basketball. And that was the other piece was I felt like I could contribute in this community of horses. And so I started teaching at a barn in 2001 while he was a pastor. And so we went from there, how we started in our careers, him as a pastor and me as a horse trainer.
Wow. That's crazy.
Yeah.
That's crazy. I didn't know you had 10 titles and
Right. Couple world titles.
that's amazing. More than qualified to do this job for sure.
When
So
I look at it.
do you think that he maybe a little bit threatened by by you going the medical route potentially?
That and the information and education that he was getting from the church, the stuff I was getting from the church was women didn't work outside of the marriage as a minister's wife. You had children and you were the pastor's wife. And we'll get to that in a little bit. Didn't even really have a name. They didn't know my name in the church necessarily. Right. I was the pastor's wife. That was my title. That was my name. So here you look at the independence growing up, get married. Thank goodness I'm so grateful I had the horse job because that was my world. I could still be me. That was the only way I ever felt connected to anything and anyone and to be alive and to be almost that leader that gave me freedom where the church did not. So I lived in two different worlds. Wow. I lived in the world that I worked in where I ran my own business, established everything. And then when I would go to church, it was be seen, be silent, don't have any opinion or because that looked poorly on who you were married to. You don't talk about your marriage. You don't talk about what you don't like. You don't even really talk about what you like. You're just a body. You're just a person. I almost felt like it was like those politician wives sometimes that you see standing up next to those politicians. I felt like just politician wife in a lot of ways. Very different night and day. What I was during the day and that what I was, who I was married to and what that expectation was. So I could feel it. I could feel the being torn between both of them. Loving my job, but being committed to the marriage. And obviously you don't even think about divorce or separation ever. It was even in my vows. I think one of my vows when I got married was that I will never divorce you. That was one of our vows to each other. And oh my gosh, Tanya, I look at the things I said and believed and I'm going, oh my goodness, no wonder why I felt trapped from the beginning is because what I committed to verbally, physically, all those things. That went on. Think about, so 2001 to 2017, so 16 years.
That's how long you were married?
I was 16, gosh, 99 is when we were married in the church. And then I was a horse trainer and he was a minister from 2001 until we divorced in like 2017. We were only part of two churches. The one where he interned, he was an associate pastor for a while. And then the one in Monument, he was a senior pastor. But I neglected my intuition. I neglected my own understanding that I mattered. And so when you're fed from scripture, and then I had a husband that was taking it to that next step, it was, I own you. You're a servant to me and to the church. You are sacrificing everything of who you are to be in this position, because they tried to make it sound like it was this elite prestige position being a minister's wife. And yet it was a very isolated, almost living prison is what I called it. I'd explained it to somebody that way, where you could get talked to a lot by people and they could have their opinions, and yet you wouldn't speak. That was something to be said. And then you look at my job speaking, my job was coaching.
Yeah.
And so it was like, here's coaching and you're speaking, and then here's science. And so never time I was going to go anywhere or do anything about it. And I had this husband as a leader that kept suppressing and putting those rules there and kept navigating where life should go in all ways. This is where we lived, what we liked, sexual relationship, all of those were all determined by him. Yeah, I got in really deep, right?
Yeah.
When you look back, you're like, how did I get here? That's what marriage and life would be like. And that's a big piece now that I advocate for, especially for my young teenagers and my own daughter, going, know who you are first and don't lose that when you're in a relationship. That's a huge part of what I counsel them to do.
That's huge, right? Yeah, I think that's great advice to be giving her for sure.
I took a detour from my own soul, intuition, all of those things for a good chunk of time, 99 to 2017.
Yeah, that's a large part of your life for sure.
Time, right? Half my life when I got divorced at the time.
Yeah.
And it was a very interesting position to be in the church. It was, the people are kind in the community and they do surround you in that sense, and they do support, especially when we started having kids, but it still never felt like I was part of it. It felt very much, go to church, here's your position, here's the position of him as a leader. But what I noticed is our relationship kept separating more. Couples, you talk to religious couples, they're like, we pray together, we do our budget together, we work together, we parent together. It got further and further apart as he got higher up in church, where our relationship was very separate. It was more like a submissive roommate. And I don't even know if I call it that. I'll add another detail. When you're talking about a sexual relationship with somebody like this, somebody who dictates and determines everything about that relationship, some of my darkest points felt like I was even lower than a prostitute because I wasn't even paid to be in a position. Right. That's what it felt like to be in a physical sexual relationship and feeling owned by a person, is that you were like, I don't even get paid for this. This is just how I get to get treated as not even a human being.
And you were taught, I'm assuming in this class that you took to be for the preacher's wife, you were taught to be that, right? And then he just enforced that as you got deeper into it.
More control, more power, how things looked. And it was amazing to look back and go, it touched everything. Like I said, he was in control of the finances. He was in control of conversations and topics. He was in control of what color couch we'd buy. There was no together or life together. It was, you provide financially, which I did quite a bit. My business and job supported us quite a bit because as a minister, they don't make a lot.
Yeah.
That's the other part of the sacrifice, is that their salaries and things like that, I needed to work outside of marriage, and yet it was frowned upon to work outside of the marriage too at the same time. So it was this battle, right? Especially horses, there's competitions on the weekends. And so I was always battling being in church on Sundays and being at a competition, right?
Yeah.
And so that was another piece of it that just was really tough. Go make the money, but I don't like your job. That was go make the money, but you're not available. Ranch work and horsework is hard. You're dirty. You're
Yeah.
out in it. And so I would come home and I would get undressed in the garage or in the laundry room because he couldn't stand the smell of my job.
Mm-hmm.
So it was very degrading. Not
Mm-hmm.
just, I don't think the church's place was ever to do that, but somehow
Sure.
this kind of power took it further.
And
And
maybe we should just say that real quick too, that like we're not
oh,
referencing all
no,
everyone and everything in all religions. Like this is just Cynda's experience specifically and what she went through, and not even necessarily that church specifically. It was just this
right.
human specifically that took power into his own hands and do it in a different way than some would.
I would agree because I met ministers and wives that were not like us. And I went to churches and things that were different. I played for worship. I don't know, I didn't mention that, but I played the guitar and I led worship a lot.
Oh,
And I
cool.
grew up playing the guitar. And so I loved playing. And that even got to a point where when you're in that position as a pastor's wife and that expectation, that was also another piece of a job. The connection to God was deteriorating as well as the marriage, because I
Mm,
go, this is God. This is who God is. And I know what he's preaching, but he doesn't live the way he preaches. He's saying one thing
mm,
at a pulpit and coming home into the home and being a completely different person, and how he approaches his marriage, his children, all of those things. And so
wow.
those worlds were very, not even constricting, that's not the right word, but they clashed quite a bit because I would always ask him, I'm like, but you preach this way and you tell men to treat their wives this way and their children this way, but you're not that person when you come home. And God, that was a lot of don't question me, don't
Mm,
question my authority. This is not your place. They had to keep building up. This is your place as a minister's wife that you chose to do. So he's right. I will own my responsibility in that sense, where being guided, but also allowing my soul to be given up like
mm,
that. Allowing that took more time for me to heal at the end of the marriage,
mm,
was the fact that I had allowed so much to happen over the years that
mm,
by the time I left, I was a shell of a person as far
mm.
as a soul and a body.
Oh,
As much as I had given financially, sexually, to family, to job, to everything, sacrifice everything to where you don't even have a name.
mm,
To rebuild that person,
mm.
it took a while.
Oh,
It
I'm sure.
it took a while in the midst of try to go through a divorce, get your kids to safety. And I'll talk about how that ended. Support them on your own, work your business, and then rebuild your own soul, mind, and
Mm,
body at the same time. That those years were some of the toughest I think I'd ever faced. Thank goodness I went through all the sports and horses and everything I did,
mm,
because I do think it prepared me for that, to be that tough and that strong, and to not have family, any community. We left the church community in the divorce. And so when you go out on your own, you realize that even your neighborhood and your church community, that's who you were immersed in. And so when you leave the church and you leave a pastor, you're very much out on your own. It's like starting life over in a way.
yeah. You got to give yourself credit though, because you met him so young. And I think that we think we know so much at that point in our lives, right? Like late
Right.
teens, early 20s, we think we have the world figured out and at times. And then looking back, you really don't know. And I think you got into that relationship and just went with what you were told and was like, okay. And so, good Lord, though, that building that back up. And I have watched you do so much work on yourself just in the short time that I've known you.
Right.
So, for everyone listening, this was not an easy journey for Cynda. She's in a good place, better place now. This work was insane and she's done the work too. Was there something specific that sticks out in your mind for when you first started realizing, oh, this is bad? This is not how things are supposed to be. What am I doing here? Was there something specific that sticks in your mind that
Oh
was a point
man,
in time that you remember?
it never got better. So there were no vacations. There was no, I worked all the time to support us. I worked when I was pregnant. I worked up until I delivered the baby, went back to work at 4 or 5 weeks, took the
Wow.
baby with me. So my job as a horse trainer, you go through those years. I think we were a couple years in, right? 7 years in, I think, before we started having kids. We actually lost the first baby. So that was
I'm
another piece
sorry.
that we had to go through that again, one of those things when you look at marriage and you're going, okay, this is the way marriage is going to be and it's supposed to be. It's the same thing. When you get pregnant and you're like, oh, okay, I'm just going to have a baby. And you don't talk about or think about the possibility of that loss until you
Mm,
experience it. And
yeah.
then it opens up a whole other door of understanding life when
Yeah.
you lose that, right? And
Hmm.
so it took its toll on the relationship. And yet we tried again, and I ended up being pregnant with my son and had him. Taylor came 18 months later, and we had moved from the church where he was an associate pastor in Denver, and he got the opportunity to be a senior pastor actually in Monument. And he took it at a small church because they brought him in knowing that he could grow it from a couple hundred to several thousand. And so
Wow.
he did have that ability and that leadership and that understanding of how to lead. His training a lot in college was leadership, right? And then add that ministry on top of that. He was a very dynamic speaker. Most people at the end say, gosh, Cynda, you tell us that he's this way, but we just don't see that. And that's how good he was at being
Mm,
to people. There were not a lot of people, no one saw behind the marriage. That was closed off in that sense, and especially since he was the pastor. And so there was no going to counseling. There was no any kind of support from family members or talking with friends. Or so it was me that had to come to the conclusion and that said, God, I was made for more than this.
mm,
This is I hit that point January, February, March of 2017
okay.
when he had already had moments of the way he would control things is when things got really tough in the church, he would threaten suicide of his own life. So those last couple years before we got divorced, there was the blaming of the pressure of the building of the church and all the pressure he's under being a minister and all those things drove him in that direction of suicide. So it made it more volatile, the relationship, right? That's when I would say more of the verbal abuse came on, more of
Mm,
that piece of him got really dark. And yet
okay.
he still led the church at the same time. And I got really tired of that roller coaster, right? And I got really tired of feeling like my home wasn't safe.
Mm,
And my children weren't safe. I would have night terrors. I would
oh,
not, it was not, it was never, it did not feel like those last couple of years, like it was a safe place for me to be. And
mm,
that started to leak into the children as well. They were young. They were 7 and 9. They were really young. And they don't remember a lot of it. But I think Taylor, if you ask her, she's my youngest, she says she does. She goes, I remember
mm,
I'm not feeling safe or wanting to be in that home. And you were
mm,
never there. I was working
mm,
100 hours a week trying to support
okay.
us. That's the other piece of that deception. He financially put us in so much debt, secret debt that I didn't even know about, with credit cards and expenses and things he had purchased that I didn't know until collectors started coming to our door,
Oh, wow.
until wages, bank accounts were garnished. Like,
Oh, wow.
right. So this is a whole world that I knew was going on, but I couldn't question him. It turned into a fight, and you don't question me. Or I'd go home after work and our water would be turned off.
Oh my
And
gosh.
what is going on? We have money. Where is it all going? And thank goodness my business was separate. So my account for my businesses and things like that were under Champions. And so they
Oh,
could
good.
not be taken. Thank goodness, because Champions saved us in a way.
Wow.
It supported us until he finally came clean and he was like, so I've spent probably $100,000 in different credit cards and loans and things that I've done. And he came clean and said, I've been lying to you and keeping this from you. In the meantime, we're still on this track of this position of leadership and pastor that nobody knew about, the marriage, I didn't know about the finances. And so here I am sitting there for a year, working 100 hours a week, trying to pay that
Mm,
he ran up, because I thought that's what a wife did.
yeah.
I can go change our lives. I can go make more money. You can't as a pastor. So I did. I left my kids in a way with him to go pay off our debt, his debt. And that pulled my children's relationship and I apart. And so when I
Mm,
went to want to leave, My son took it the hardest. My daughter was okay. She wanted to get out, but it was a couple years of my son just blaming me for
Mm.
everything that had happened. So you asked me, circling back to your question, when did I know? I knew for a couple of months. I was like, I can't stay here anymore.
Mm.
I yeah, how to divorce a pastor and how to leave a church.
Wow.
There's definitely not a book on that.
A
There's
book,
definitely
or
not
you've said another podcast. There's
how
not a lot out
to,
there.
right? How do you literally leave a community that would be is completely shocked by the marriage ending? And how do you get your kids out and not look like I was the one that abandoned them? That was the
Mm.
problem, Tanya, that was happening is I had proven that I was not in the home because I was making the money. And so he was telling people, yeah, she's working. Yeah, she's not here. It was that for me, my wife is more telling the kids also felt that they're like, you abandoned us. And
Oh,
nobody knew that it was for the reason of supporting the family and getting out of this
because
debt.
he'd
Nobody knew.
racked up
Right.
$100,000 plus in debt.
Nobody knew that.
He
And I
wasn't
just
telling that
lived
part of the
through that.
story. God forbid.
There was never those things were ever shared. And it got to a point where there was one member in the church that I love dearly. She was a former alcoholic and an atheist, and she turned Christian, and she was no longer alcoholic, but I felt connected to her like she was real. I was like, this is a person that's lived life in a really hard way that I could, for some reason, felt a connection to share with her what was a little bit that was in my marriage. And she could read it, she could see it. She was
Really?
like, I feel like you're going to leave.
Mm.
And we sat down at a meal together. And I just said, I can't do this anymore. This is
Mm.
not who I am. And if I don't get out now, I don't know how much longer I'm going to live.
Mm.
That's that was the feeling I had in my home of a different massage therapist, a good friend of mine. She looks back at that time frame and she goes, there were times when I didn't think you were going to make it because I
Mm.
feared for your life. And you don't realize that you don't think that's part of a marriage or a church or a minister. You don't think that would be possible, but that changed things for me. And the turning point, I knew if I left, I wouldn't get the kids, and I didn't want to leave without them because I didn't want to leave them with the kind of person that he was.
Mhm.
And it was March of 2017. We were supposed to go on a trip for spring break for a couple of days with the kids. I came home from work. At that time, I was having anxiety attacks, panic attacks. I couldn't be in the same vehicle with him. I couldn't sit next to him just because
Yeah.
that fear and that anxiety was there. And I refused to go on the trip. I just said, I think I'm going to stay here and I'm going to work. And I had made a plan. I went to a bank and I opened up a bank account because I didn't know how to start putting money in a place to be able to support the children without him being a part of an account. And
Mhm.
I started that process that week while the kids were gone. And he came home on that trip and he could tell I said, we
Oh.
need after dinner, we put the kids to bed. I want to talk about some things. And I think he already knew that I was at a place where I wanted to leave. And he decided to drink a bottle of whiskey
Oh.
and drowned himself essentially in what he knew was coming.
Mm.
And I was with the kids and we were watching a movie and I heard him stumble up to the main level of the house. At that time, he'd been living in the basement for about a year or two because we were that separated. And he went out to try to drive away after he had,
Oh, wow.
and so my heart was like, there's no way I'd want him to hurt somebody else or die. So
Yeah.
I remember parking my vehicle behind his vehicle so he couldn't get out.
Mm.
Because he was so intoxicated, he also he had a CCW, so he could carry a gun on his body.
Mhm.
He had it on his body as he was trying to leave that night. And so don't ask me how or why I did it. I managed to take the gun and go put it in a safe place. He had a couple of knives on him as well. And I that he was going to take his or somebody else's. And so
Mm.
I managed to wrestle those things away from him and block him from driving away. And at the time, I think I went back in and I got the kids in their rooms to safety because I didn't know what was happening. Church was starting to up their securities and things like that. there was enough turmoil in the church of where to put money. They were building big millions of dollars worth of buildings and expanding and things like that. There was not always a great opinion of my ex-husband in that time frame, and they didn't want the kids and I to suffer that. And so we had an actual security escort that would sit with us or next to us or behind us when we were in church. And that's a whole different, you'd feel having somebody watch you, right? And these were volunteers. They were FBI agents, sheriffs, local police, anybody that was a member in the church would volunteer for church security. So there was an agent, an FBI agent that I had friends with, and him and his wife and his children. And I called him that night and I said, I have no idea what to do. This is the situation I'm in. I need your help. He wasn't even supposed to be in town that weekend. And he contacted the Monument Police and they came quietly because there was no history of a record of police being called in that evening. And so I was able to get my kids and myself to my own vehicle and law enforcement to him to separate the situation. And I got us out of danger, which I felt that's the headed. They assessed him that night and they did not feel like it was important to take him in and let him sleep it off. They actually took him at home. And so that night I'm driving around with 2 children and a dog trying to figure out where to stay safely until he comes to, if he's alive, if he doesn't take his life that night after what happened.
Oh my goodness.
Knowing I didn't even get the chance, Tani, to say, here's the direction I'm going to separate, we're going to divorce, everything. He thought the solution was, let's drink and drive or kill myself or something.
Jeez.
Like that's how far he had gone. But I was grateful that night that those law enforcement people were actually able to help us remove ourselves.
Yeah.
And so did I ever think it was going to go to that extreme? No. I never prepared myself in a way to manage that and have to take 2 children through that and watch that at the same time. And yet what it did do was it gave me the ability then to get out of the marriage with my kids. So it turned, right? That event, thank goodness we came out with our lives.
Yeah.
It turned enough to where it showed enough of his issues and problems that then I didn't have to feel threatened that I was going to lose my kids and be the person that abandoned them if I left. So that event turned things around and gave me that primary priority care of the children.
Wow.
And the church took him and said, let's put you on sabbatical and try to get you some help. At that time, though, I was like, I'm done.
Yeah.
I said to the church, I said, take care of him. I think that the 11 years of ministry he's put in, there should be some value there of taking care of your pastor. I've got a business and I can take care of my kids. And thank goodness I did. And we were able to separate and go our different directions. He got some help for a while, just not enough. I think looking at it, not enough to really make a difference. I think he's still probably the same person today in his ideals and mindset. And he's remarried now. He's still a pastor, he's still a minister. But I look at those events that were that turning point, and I'm so grateful that I lived, because I knew, as hard as it was, that I was made for so much more, and God was so much more than what he was being presented as. And I didn't want my children to be raised in that environment, that sense, and experience what I had experienced as a human being, to where there was that much control over what a person was allowed to do. Yeah.
Oh,
yeah.
What a story. What has your healing journey from this looked like? It's been hard, I know that, but what all have you done? If somebody's listening who's been in this position or something similar, yeah, what have you done? Share what you've done and what you've learned and all that.
It was probably a good, after I finally got our home sold and got things separated and moved to Castle Rock, and I knew I had to make my world very small. I said, the children's school, my home job, because I'm alone. I had no family, no community, didn't know anybody really where I was moving to, even though it was only 25 minutes away, 20 minutes away. And I just was like, okay, you can do this. Like, you can help contribute. You can support yourself and your kids. You can get the rest of the way out of debt. Like, I had that thread of hope. And yet the nights were the toughest for me, because I would lay in bed and it just felt like this image of shattered glass. I'm like, what is not broken in my life? What is in pieces? What is fractured? Because everything felt like it was fractured. And I just was like, okay, where do I start rebuilding? Because I can't do it all at once. I
Yeah.
still have to provide and cook and take care of the children. What does that healing journey look like for me? It had to take it like piece by piece. And thank goodness at the time the massage therapist I was working with worked in trauma as well. And so she worked on me prior to that divorce and knew the whole situation, the divorce, knew everything post-divorce. And so I went to her once a week. That was the one thing that I stayed in, was that place to go to let everything down and just go, where do I start rebuilding? Because my soul and my body were disconnected. Like I was not in my body, is what I would call it. To survive, I've heard of that. When you have to survive something, you separate in that sense.
Yeah.
And then to put me back together physically and to put me back together and connect that soul, it was years of working with a massage therapist, with a chiropractor. And I wouldn't call these people just the physical, they didn't just manipulate the body. They were deeper healer, soul connection people. They were light. And I had a couple of people in that network that were trying to connect my body and my soul and giving me encouragement and telling me there is love, there is love, and love wins. And don't give up on this self. But the biggest thing I had to learn was to love me. Because you're told for so long what you're not, from your looks to who you are to your job. I had to reestablish who I was. I didn't even know what my favorite color was.
Oh my
I
goodness.
didn't even know what I had to learn to live again.
Because you weren't allowed to have a favorite color.
Right. It never mattered. It never mattered what that side that I loved. And I think about horses. I think the healing through the horses were a big horses and being able to work on a ranch. I would show up and my assistant trainer would just pass me a horse because she could tell I just had such a hard time trying to figure out what to do. She's go ride for an hour and come back and then we'll start work. And that's what I would do. I would just go ride and I ride out and I would breathe because I was having anxiety attacks, right? I was having all these panic attacks. And so I had to learn to just breathe again. I had to learn to look for ways to create space and clear out all that garbage that was there and retrain and reprogram what I thought I was, what I believed. I found counselors along the way. So to help process still how to be a mom and how to process trauma, I did found a couple of counselors that I was able to go in and have sessions with and talk with. I connected it with horses, though, I will say that. I always found people that I would call healers and light workers and professionals that connected to what I could connect to. So it was usually through an animal for me that I could understand myself and how I could be grounded and stay connected. And so I used a woman that knew Gestalt coaching. She did therapy through horses and she would do a session with me with a horse there. It was amazing to see that small network help me heal through those. And then, of course, what comes from those professionals are, have you read this book? Have you listened to this podcast? Here's a little bit of wisdom that I went through when I went through my divorce. And so in that network of that close group of people, they shared their experiences and then said, here are a couple of ways. There were some really great books along the way. And of course, I can't think of any name of them right now.
Yeah.
But it was that big picture of that network of people and what I did. And I had to do it through horses and through my body in order to make that connection with my soul to come back.
So where are you now?
Oh man, I've been single for 7 years, right? I have attempted some dating and stuff, and I was single for a reason because I felt like I needed to know who I was and what I wanted in order to then go into a relationship and not lose myself again, not compromise myself again. Safety was a big feature too, right? With my experience with this other person and how dark and how physically the point of death that it had gotten. I also protected my kids, right? So that took a while for me to allow space to come in and heal that piece of going, all people are like this. there is hope. Because I was like, at the time, I was like, I am not getting married again, and I am not going to be in a relationship. And I am, then you get to a place now, the last couple of years, I've wanted to connect with somebody, but it's so different right from the first time around.
Sure.
Um, you come from a different place. And I think that I watch my young trainers that have seen me go through this experience, these young women that are between 18 and 22, my own daughter, and they know the things that happened. And my contribution to them is saying, you and your soul are till death do you part. Even if you have the most perfect partner, they may not always be there. And so
Mm,
if you understand the depth of your own love for yourself and your own
mm,
soul, your own body, and everything that you appreciate about you, you will navigate relationships, jobs, losses, all of the things so much better when that
mhm.
relationship with yourself is there, and that you actively work on yourself, whether that's fitness or books or meditation. All of those have been a part of this healing journey. They continue to be a part of that healing journey. I'm not done transforming.
We're all always a work in progress. I fully believe that.
Right. And I love when I'm always open to new people that come into my life, because I'm going, there's something I can learn. The group of students I have now, their families have these amazing marriages. And I'm going, okay, so it is possible. It is possible to
Mm.
have relationships and marriages and raise children and do this together. I had those examples. And so I'm always open to what gets sent my way of what I need to learn from that.
I think that's a
Oh yeah.
really key piece to healing too. Wouldn't you say? You have to be open to the possibilities. You have to be open to advice. You have to, if you're closed off from a lot of that stuff, I think it makes the healing process not impossible, but so much harder and so much longer. And I do believe the universe is looking out for us and places people in our lives and things in our lives at certain times for certain reasons. And, but you have to be, like you said, you have to be open to it. You have to be ready to receive it. And
That's a harder piece, right? To receive it. I would say that
Mhm.
word, that I've had to learn that word, receive generosity or help from other people, because when you isolate your life, coming out of the marriage I did, I didn't trust anybody. I didn't trust allowing people to help me. And I was very much raised like that, in that sense, where I was like, you're strong enough to do this alone. And I believe that. I know that got me through some years. Now I would enjoy someone to share it with. I enjoy that
Mhm.
partnership in that way, and be a life-giving relationship that is something that you see my gifts and I see you and you see
Mm.
me, and you're never trying to control that person in any way. You work with each other in such a way where this is this freedom, this kind of open-handed. I think about my children this way too. When I help them navigating what they want to do or what they love, I'm like, it's not for me. You're not doing it for me or for your father or
Mm.
for anyone else. What do you want? And
Mm.
what do you love? And this is what that path looks like. Very different raising my kids, somewhat from the way my family raised me, and then this experience with this marriage, and with them about life and what they'll face, and the things that they can always transform and be changed. They can
Mm.
always heal in that sense. And it took me the longest to forgive myself. I will say that in this
Mm.
process, I forgave everybody else and
Mm.
even him. And just, I had a hard time forgiving myself because I allowed myself to get in that situation.
Mm.
And you get to that point where you go, if you don't forgive yourself, then how are you going to keep going? How are you going to dream again? How are you going to trust your own
Mm.
intuition and your own soul again? I didn't dream for a long time. I didn't write down or manifest things in that survival period of time. And these last couple of years, it's been amazing to dream again and go,
Mm.
this is what I want. And this is what I can do. And even with the injuries I've had some along the way and the changes in life, I still haven't lost that ability to dream
Mm.
about that future, whether it's with somebody, but definitely that future with myself,
Mm.
and maintaining that connection with my own body and soul.
I love that. You're so inspirational. I love everything that's coming out of your mouth right now.
We get to sit down for this period of time and just go, okay, what's the story and where are you at and where are you going? What do you dream about? I dream about an incredible relationship with my kids. I love the work that I get to do because now I get to show people how horses can help them. It's not just the competition and the coaching. My favorite thing to do with somebody with a horse is get them to breathe with them, get them to allow that world of trauma that they've experienced and anxiety and the things that they're dealing with, because everybody walks in the door dealing with something, right? There's something that they manage.
100%.
Oh gosh. And just going, here's this horse. And then walking them through knowing and trusting themselves and allowing the horse to help them breathe. I've had horses help people breathe because they'll take deep breaths. And there's a connection and a healing that I've always had now that I look back that I get to share with people. That's one of my favorite things to do with humans and horses. In spite of the competition and the titles and the things that all come with that, my favorite thing to do is that they get grounded in who they are and they can overcome anything that they're going through. And that the work, like I said, is never done. You're going to keep doing that work. It's never like, all right, I fixed it.
You may fix the one thing, but then there's going to be something else down the road, right? Life's not perfect and we all hit bumps in the road. And that's a little bit why I decided to start this podcast, is so that people can find comfort and solace in the fact that life is never perfect for anyone and everybody walks in with their shit.
Yes. And then how you deal with it, right? How you treat people. I think people ask me, they're like, how are you bitter against marriage or your ex-husband or the church or these kinds of things? And I'm like, I took so much time and love and gave to those years that I don't want to waste anymore by I went through the anger periods of time and I went through all those things. Those were part of that process of healing. I didn't want to stuff it down because I knew it would come out somewhere else.
Yep, usually does.
That's right. You can stuff it down as far as you can, and yet it's going to come out, and processing it as it comes up. Fewer and fewer triggers happen nowadays. But when they do, the tools are there. I think the first thing I go to is I just close my eyes and I take a breath. And I love a phrase from one of the books that we read, Untamed, that's imagine the truest and most beautiful story that you can imagine about life and love and things like that. And so when I go into a trigger or things get tough or it gets dark for a while, or I revert to some old behaviors, I close my eyes and I take a breath. I'm like, wait a second, you've come really far and transformed and going in a different direction versus backwards. And so I don't carry that bitterness towards the church. There's great people in churches out there. There's great leaders out there. My experience with my own personal experience wasn't that, but I would say you've got to find your own soul first, and that navigates those decisions, whether it's relationships or organizations or churches that you belong to, and pay attention to those red flags. Don't dismiss yourself. That was the thing I did a lot, was I just dismissed. I was like, well, that doesn't feel right, or that doesn't feel like we should do that, or that's wrong, or I just dismissed it. And so having that knowing, trusting your own knowing of when something was right or wrong, not letting a Bible or a leader or somebody tell you. That people are gifted with that. I think we lose that as we age, and especially as we enter relationships, as we stop listening to that knowing. That's
my last kind of question to start to wrap things up was going to be, what advice would you give to someone out there listening, which you just touched on, but is there any other final parting words that you'd like to give to someone struggling out there, that maybe young Cynda as well?
As I look back, what would I counsel her as? So many words of wisdom. I would lay in bed and I would have said this to myself. I for sure think that as I look at how I am now, and I'm excited about being able to grow and continue to train. And there's nothing for me that's ever set in stone. We're going to face things morally, and we're going to face things that come up in our lives and our relationships, and having that openness of communication, but also asking yourself. A lot of people will go ask other people, and there's nothing wrong with that. I still do that. But I find that it should not overtake that question you should ask yourself.
Mm-hmm.
When you go, what would I do? I've learned muscle testing. I don't know if you've worked with muscle testing and things like that, where you ask yourself a question, and if you go forward, it's a yes. If you go backward, it's a no. I've done different things with body workers that talk about, even if you're not sure what the verbal answer is, a lot of times your body will respond to what that answer is. And so muscle testing, that's an interesting direction to go. But I find that taking the time and allowing the space to ask yourself what you want, that's important. And that you're never so trapped. I hear a lot of people tell me stories that they're stuck in their marriage or they can't leave. And I'm going, you're talking to the wrong person as far as believing that you can't leave, because I left a church community of thousands of people. I left a pastor that was a senior pastor in this community, in this area of the world. I left with myself, my kids, and my ability. And sure, is it hard? And a lot of people don't want to face that hardship, but it is possible. And especially, it's never too late to realize that you're worth it and that you were made for more than what somebody else has told you that you are.
I love that.
I still am in body work, so I still do the massage work and the chiropractic work and talk to counselors still. I still read books. I still have to keep that connection. Breathing, yoga, all those things are part of what I do for myself. And then what that does is it makes me be able to then help other people. So if I tell people that, I'm like, when I'm taking care of myself and not so depleted, I can give to other people and I can help a lot of people. And so when everybody walks in that door and they tell me why they want to ride horses, I know that there's a deeper reason for why they're here. And most people know the barn, they're like, I'm not going to ride today. I'm just going to walk. I'm going to pet my horse. I'm going to go breathe a little bit. And it's that they've learned to get away from the noise of their lives and come out to a ranch, and whether a horse or another horse, just go, I'm going to create some space. And sometimes a horse will help them. And it's not necessarily thing or a feedback. It's their body language, it's their breathing, it's what the person tells the horse and how the horse kind of pieces and creates that space of trust, that they're able to trust themselves. That's a big part of this, is people lose trust in themselves. And so making connection. So it's finding that gift that I have to do that with.
I will link your website in the show notes. So if anybody's looking for horse therapy, they can come find you.
Come on out. We have an amazing space out here to be able to breathe, let alone it becomes really clear when you allow some people to do that, whether it's walking or meditation or a dog. But I think everybody has to have that space. You have to know that space is important because it can get pretty overrun. And then you lose track of yourself and your health and your well-being. And then being able to pull back from that. Did a couple of trips to the beach. The ocean was someplace that I would say was very healing. I would take a lot of walks, and I would almost imagine all of the turmoil and trauma and everything being pulled away from the waves. And then that frequency of the ocean filling you back with life and just clearing things, right? That sand and sun and healing, that's very healing for me, still is today. So whether it's the ranch or being out at the ocean, those two things really contributed to that. But I think everybody's got to take that time for themselves and to create that space so that they continue the work themselves.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you for coming on here and being so vulnerable and sharing your story and sharing your knowledge. You had some really amazing points in there that I'm just like, made me tear up and just really filled my heart with joy too. Thank you so much for coming on here. Thank you for sharing your story. I think this has been a great conversation, and I think I'd love to have you back to talk more deeply about some other things and at some point. Yeah.
If this helps one person, it's worth it. If it helps you and me telling our story, and it's even me to speak it and go, okay, what's that next chapter? Because I want to keep going, because I feel like life is still ahead. It can still be beautiful and amazing in spite of kind of that beauty that rises from the ashes. Believed that. And there were some dark nights though, where I just was like, man, I'm a thread here and I'm alone. And yet I realized that alone wasn't, I didn't understand that. I was like, wait, you're not alone. You're here. Your heart, your mind, and your body is here. And so this is who you need to get to know yourself. And that made all the difference in the world going forward after that.
It's so amazing how, I don't know, intellectually, we know we're not alone, right? We know there's people out there going through our story. And before we started recording, Cynda was telling me that there's not a lot of resources and stuff out there on being specifically a pastor's wife and that kind of a journey. There's not a lot of support and things like that out there for people in her situation. And I think, like I said, intellectually, we know that there are other people going through similar things, but sometimes you just feel so alone and so dark in some of those really deep, dark places that we get ourselves into sometimes. So yeah, I hope that this helps anybody out there listening, whether you've been through this or other things, and you can take tidbits from it. But yeah, so thank you so much. And thank you everyone for listening, and we'll see you on the next episode. Thank you so much for tuning into today's episode. If you enjoyed our conversation and found value in the stories shared, please consider following us on your preferred podcast platform. Your ratings and reviews make a huge difference. They help us reach more listeners and continue bringing you engaging, insightful content. We appreciate your support and would love to hear your thoughts and feedback. Until next time, keep listening, growing, and sharing.